On your end, does it say it's recording? Okay, perfect. All right, so welcome to the Maley Way. I am your host, Jim Maley. Today I have a guest on that I wish would have been around when I was playing hoops at Northwestern. She's the director of performance psychology and wellness for the Charlotte Hornets. Before working in professional basketball, she spent years helping college athletes and high school athletes navigate the mental side of the game, and she knows the world firsthand as well because she was a college athlete herself. I'd like to welcome Rachel Webb to the podcast. So thank you, Rachel, for joining me.
Thank you, Jim. I appreciate you having me.
Yeah, and before we dive in, I got to give a quick shout out to our mutual acquaintance. He's a friend of mine. He might be a friend of yours, John Flood. John was coaching at UIC when you were working there, and when I first started doing this, he mentioned your name as someone that I should connect with. He said you had a great impact on, their program. He was a baseball coach. You had a great impact on them. He told me I got to get you on the show. So I'm glad we were able to do it. He said you're the real deal. So John, if you're listening, which I think you are, because I know you'll listen to this one, thank you for making the connection. Rachel, please feel free to lie about how amazing John was to work with. But before we get into what you're doing now specifically, I want to start with basically kind of how you got here. And I'm going to ask a question to start. And I know you're not supposed to ask a woman this, but I think it matters in terms of the mental health discussion. How old are you?
Oh, nice. Okay.
Yeah.
I was like, ooh, what question?
No.
Starting off super strong. First, I have to lie about John. Now I have to answer this personal question. No, I do want to say, appreciate John a ton. Just to take one step back, because I think what you're doing is he was part of this process too, right? In his own way, that because UIC baseball accepted me in the way that they did, that's the only way I have an impact is people like John who will allow me to be in meetings, will encourage players to meet with me, will, create the very integrated approach where we are preventing and responding in a really effective way to what the guys are dealing with. So he is kind of a pain, but generally speaking, made a lot possible for me. So I don't get to do my job without people like John. And that's all I'll share about him. And I'm 32.
Okay, so 30. The reason why I wanted to ask you, and I know you're not supposed to ask that, but I think it's important in terms of the mental health conversation, because I think people my age, this was just never, it was never talked about ever. And people definitely older than me, it was not talked about at all. I guess growing up, I know you grew up in California, was the mental side of things discussed at that time? You're 10 years younger than me. I'm wondering if it was discussed at all while you were growing up.
At least in my personal experience, I wouldn't, it's relative, right, to everybody. So maybe more than your experience, also because I'm a female is probably unique, that it's a little bit more socially acceptable to talk about it. But I wouldn't say in the way that it's discussed now. That was not my experience growing up. I still had the very traditional coaches that you think of, and the tough rides home with certain parents. All of that was my lived experience. So no, I didn't necessarily get exposed to the mental health journey and the reality of what that was going to be like until well into maybe more so my college years.
Gotcha.
And a little bit of high school.
Okay. And then I know you had mentioned this when we kind of texted with each other, but you kind of have always been interested in the psychology behind people. Give me an example of that at a young age.
Yeah. I definitely have had some nature versus nurture. I'm not sure, but some capacity to just, be really interested in what other people are going through. And in full disclosure, didn't really think about what I was going through until a much later time, and continuing to learn about my own self. But I can still remember stories of me being a teacher's aide and always wanting to the teacher looks stressed and overwhelmed, so how can I help her? I'm in first grade, second grade, third grade, wanting to help the kindergartners, right? I've have it figured out 3 years later. And my mom used to tell me this story. She was when she would jump into the room mom kind of deal every couple months. And she was like, Rachel, you would pull kids aside and like there was this computer desk, we would have quiet time, and I sat under the computer and I had another person, a young guy, his name was Jack, sitting on the other side of the wall. It was like a confessional.
Yeah.
I had like I had structured this in like third grade. And I'm like, hey, just talk to me about what's really going on, and I'm
That is
this
amazing.
child running these like very private consultations with my classmates. So yeah, I've always had some sort of knack and interest in trying to help other people.
So that actually, I have a third grade, or no, she's second grade daughter right now,
Yeah.
and she is very similar. She's like a helper, always wants to be involved. Like I've actually had her on the podcast, and like
That's
it,
incredible.
it was as a joke at first, but then she did it, and I was like, oh my god, this was actually amazing.
That's so good.
So maybe she'll end up. Maybe you can help her get into that field 20 years from now.
More than
um,
happy to.
yeah. So, all right. So you kind of had that knack, almost like that empathetic mind, and I know you got into sports. Well, I know you were primarily focused on soccer. Were you kind of
Mhm.
playing a lot of different sports at a young age, or did you kind of narrow in on that right away?
Yeah, I'd say I specialized probably a little, quote unquote, specialized. I wasn't that good, but
Yeah.
did kind of lock into that around middle school and just played soccer. I had older cousins who were phenomenal, really, really great soccer players. And so I kind of followed in their footsteps, but played, every sport growing up until about probably 13 or 14, and then just kind of locked in on high school soccer and tournament soccer. It ends up being, as I'm sure you're aware as a dad, like a full-time year-round deal with that
Hmm.
particular sport. So that was what
Yeah.
got me through middle school, high school, college.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like that like emphasis on like being a helper and being empathetic and like wanting to understand people, like I'm guessing that made you a pretty good leader. Like were you like one of the leaders on your team, I would assume?
Yeah, yeah, for better or for worse.
Yeah.
I had someone at work the other day talking about or asking me like, "How were you with group projects when you were in high school?" Because not only was I a little bit, maybe overly empathetic, I also was a bit of a nerd, and so I really
Yeah.
prioritized how we're collaborating and we're getting stuff done, and that definitely bled on to the soccer field. So, kind of taking initiative, always trying to get the pulse of the team. I definitely have more clear memories of high school and college, becoming the captain. Like even if me and the coach didn't get along,
Hmm.
he would just, all right, well, you have an influence and an impact on the team, and that's just
Hmm.
always how it kind of shook out. And in college, which maybe we'll get to a little bit more, but I was
Yeah.
injured quite a lot.
Yeah.
And really had to kind of find a space for myself, and that ended up being one of them. Despite a rocky start with me and my coach, he knew and I knew it was the way that I could help and impact the team. And so yeah, definitely a thing that I've been able to lean into over the years that have helped from a performance standpoint big time.
Yeah. And I wanted to talk about like first of all, where did you end up going playing in college?
I played at Cal State Northridge out
Okay,
in
yeah, okay, that's what I
yeah,
thought. I
California.
saw that that's where you graduated from. So, like, I know you got hurt and you had a bunch of injuries. And looking back on my coaching career, and I remember as a player, but looking back on my coaching career, I kind of felt like I almost, for better or worse, almost abandoned some of those
Mm,
people who, the mentality is always like, all right, next man up or next woman up. Like that's the
sure.
mentality. And I think that's what you have to have from first to a certain extent, but you also have to like be aware, like, hey, this person's going from something. I almost felt like people who were injured got isolated at times.
Mhm.
Like they were completely isolated. And I could see how that could really affect someone. And it wasn't until like I started reflecting back on that. I probably started thinking about this a couple of years ago. And I was like, man, I
Mm,
think I would have done a better job when someone was hurt. Um, yeah, you got to have that next person up mentality, but you also have to like, you're responsible for this kid. And did you kind of
mhm.
feel that ever, like when you were hurt, like where you were isolated and things like that?
Yeah, yeah, I think it's fascinating, and you and me both. Like, obviously, my perspective and my lens was just the receiver of that isolation and the receiver of like the next man up, and it wasn't me,
Mhm.
um, and I think over the years in my own professional work and personal development, like have empathy and understand, like from a coaching perspective, you guys don't have a lot of capacity to
Yeah,
care
right.
about, like to kind of spread that out. And so I definitely, as I've gotten older, understood kind of why he did, what he did. And but yeah, I definitely had that experience. I mean, it was very much like, we're also a mid-major, and so we have less of a staff and less resources, and
Mm,
you just, you kind of have to take care of yourself. Like I'm running myself, I'm having to take a lot of initiative. You're the last person. If you aren't performing at a high level, there is a hierarchy and what
yeah,
kind of resources and attention you're going to get from everybody. I know that feels dirty. We don't want to think that medical providers or coaches are picking and choosing, but like they have to. There's only so much to go around. And so that was heavily dictated how I felt about myself and my value and my worth, especially in my freshman and sophomore year. Those were definitely the hardest. Thought a lot about transferring, thought a lot about um, just quitting and generally
yeah,
not doing it anymore, of course.
yeah,
So I think there was quite a bit of like life lessons in figuring out how else I could impact or feel valued and really like compartmentalize my
mhm,
relationship with the coach and how he made me feel about who I was as a person. And I definitely won't repeat some of the conversations we've
yeah,
had on the podcast. But yeah, I think that grew my kind of heart and my respect for what I do now, and why I take kind of the psychological um, experience of athletes going through injuries so seriously, because it is really hard to pick up on, and it tends to be the last thing that we're thinking about, but statistically can be one of the things that keeps somebody off the field more than their physical recovery. And
yeah,
it can have much more long-term effects, right? If you are experiencing the levels of anxiety that I felt trying not to mess up coming back, was
mhm,
looking back now, I'm like, oh my God, how did I
yeah.
function as a person? I was like just riddled to the bone
Now,
of trying to prove myself.
how was the anxiety? Like, did you have, I imagine there had to be fear of getting
Yes.
re-injured. Okay, yeah, I mean, just imagine that that would be there too as well.
Yeah. And fear of just making mistakes. If
Yeah,
my injuries were really unique, not really unique, but they just happened during um, right after the off season. And so I always felt like I was playing catch up during the off season, which ended up leading to a lot of overuse injuries. So it was this kind of
mhm,
nasty cycle. And so not only like a fear of it, to be honest, in my personal experience, it was probably more a fear of making a mistake and wanting to be able to be on the field and always feeling behind, never feeling like I could see straight when I was out there, compared to the fear of the re-injury. Like I was pretty committed on the physical side of like getting back and recovering and really trusted that staff. And I think
mhm.
my issue was probably more I would push my body beyond its limits. And so I didn't really care about doing too much. And that was the problem. It was then I'm
Yeah,
doing too much and now I'm overwhelmed. And um, yeah, I'm constantly in my own head every single drill, every single time the ball is coming to me, trying to figure it out. And as much as I, in that moment, one, didn't totally recognize it, to I think some of the story you've shared about yourself, like didn't know what I was really experiencing. Over
yeah,
the years, every time I look back, I kind of re-understand what was
yeah,
happening. And
for
and
sure.
there's just, as much as it was happening on the field, there's no way I wasn't carrying that around, to
Mhm.
other parts of my life and other parts of my identity. So it was quite the experience.
Yeah, and well, I guess the other thing that I wanted to ask you, like, so you said you were at a mid-major, at that time, when I was in college, there was nothing. There was no
Hmm.
like, so what I'm saying, there was no like Rachel Webb to help you out, right? At that time, like at Cal State Northridge, there was no person there who like was in like
We
that field.
we had a like mental skills person. There was one woman who worked in the kinesiology department, so
Okay,
like super removed, and that wasn't until my junior year she'd come and do like a session with the team,
gotcha.
once every 4 months or something like that. It wasn't specific to mental health. It didn't come till later, and there was no real integration. It was, a team talk, which is probably all the access she had and having been in that position
Yeah.
now.
Mhm.
But yeah, that was what we had.
Yeah. Well, no, I just think that's, well, I guess the other thing that I wanted to ask you is like, for me, I'm almost, you look back and like I had some struggles, but
Mhm.
I'm almost glad now that they happened,
Mhm.
because it has me doing this right now. Like
Mhm.
it has me doing something that I think, my ceiling was not to play for the Charlotte Hornets. My ceiling was probably, it probably could have played in Europe, if I would have kept playing. And
Mhm.
even as a coach, like I had a certain ceiling. I feel like
Mhm.
all those struggles though they're kind of helping me doing something that I really like and enjoy, and two, that I think I can have an impact with. Like, do you kind of look back on some of those things, and obviously you don't want to be injured and hurt, but you kind of look back at those struggles and are glad they happened because they've, I know this is a leading question, but they've allowed you to kind of, get to this point where, I mean,
Yeah.
you're working in the NBA, helping guys out, and I know you had a focus on, got, people coming from more difficult areas, like, so
Mhm.
obviously you're doing that right now. Like, do you look back on those times, like, almost fondly, like, that they made you to this point?
Yeah, and at the very least, I can laugh a little
Yeah,
bit
yeah,
about
yeah.
some of the more traumatic parts of it. But no, it is a leading question, and I also
Yeah.
like, and you're leading me in the direction I would want to go because I do feel
That
like
was a long leading question.
you're good. Nice runway. You're like, I'm dishing it out for
Yeah,
you.
yeah.
Run with it. No, and it's true. Like I would disagree if it didn't feel genuine, but it really does. I remember a mentor of mine. Um, again, back to just like learning more and more about yourself. And I know it's like mental health and just your own self awareness is just an ever changing journey. She really challenged me when I was coming into grad school. She was like, "Why are you the way that you are? Like, why are you, and like really pushed me to think about it. Like, how did you actually get through those 4 years of college? Like, how did you do it?"
Mhm.
And that was a phenomenal question because I had never really looked up to figure that out. And I revisit it often, like, what about me? What about the situation? What did I really learn? And how do I kind of carry that with me? And so I am super grateful. And I think I'm not a fan of the like everything happens for a reason. I know that might be controversial. Not a fan. I
Mhm.
think some crazy stuff happens that I'm like, probably not.
Yeah, right,
Some
exactly.
awful, awful, awful experiences.
Yeah.
But I do think that we have a chance to make meaning out of anything. And I think that's what I value the most is over the years since then, over the last 10 years, just trying to make that experience work for me now. And
Yeah.
whether it be my empathy or my resilience or my self-awareness, um, having just been in those kinds of situations has been really helpful. And to your point, like I think that it put me on a path that I needed to be on, like I'm so grateful that if I hadn't gotten injured as much as I did, I wouldn't there's so many things that wouldn't have happened, right? I wouldn't have
Mhm.
studied sports psychology the way that I did. I wouldn't have focused on school in the same way. I wouldn't have met certain individuals, to be honest. I was
Yeah.
really close with the women's basketball team because my team traveled and I was injured and I'd stay home. And um, they're the ones who connected me to Dr. Wendy Bollaby, who 6 months
Mhm.
after we met started working for the Chicago Bulls. And six
Mhm.
months after that, I got an internship with her. You start to look back and you see all these avenues that you were able to take because of the situation. Not a great situation, but some really fantastic paths. Um, the random thought, just because the analogy that has stuck with me recently. Matthew McConaughey wrote a book called Green Lights. I don't know if you've read
Mhm.
it.
No, I've
Um,
not.
it's good.
I
It's
I
good.
love I
Very
love me some Matthew McConaughey,
okay. And
though.
and he reads it. So I actually listened to it on audio. Like I had to hear him tell
Oh,
his own
that
story.
that he could read anything and I would like
Correct.
it.
And it's his whole life story, which is fantastic, and how he shares in his vulnerability. But the main premise is like even if it felt like a red light at the beginning, like when you look back, it actually turned green. And that's how this whole process has felt for me is like, all these lights ended up turning green and making kind of carving out this path for me.
Yeah. Well, and then too, like I always think about it as a team. Like I tell my own kids, like
Mm.
it's important. Not everyone's going to be the star of the team. Sometimes the star,
Can't be, shouldn't
yeah,
be.
yeah, right. And
I
sometimes
don't
the,
recommend it actually.
yes, exactly. And sometimes the star, like they end up not being able to figure life out as easy
Mm,
as someone who is able to work within the framework
sure.
of a team, or like you who you're hurt and now you got to figure out a way to contribute when you're hurt. Like what do you think you learned from that, like being hurt? Like I know you said you found a way to contribute. Like how exactly were you contributing in those ways?
Yeah, I think from a leadership standpoint, like I had a different capacity to try to take care of the team, so I would like collaborate with my coach on how do we, I remember walking into his office one day. And I don't know if you're an Always Sunny fan, but that scene
Oh
where
yeah.
Charlie, okay, that
Yeah.
scene where Charlie has like all the things that are connected to with the red rope or whatever. It's
Yeah.
basically looked like that when I walked in, and he was
Yeah.
trying to process like who's connected to who, are these arrows going both ways? And so that was such an interesting moment where I realized that I could have an influence on such a substantial amount of the team. And so I spent a lot of time helping him get his points across to people, like how to message, how to build relationships, a lot of like managing interpersonal dynamics within our team. And then even just spending my own time, like I was a mentor and I was a tutor for student athletes,
Hmm.
which I think also contributed to like our group and setting those standards. And then served as a captain my last 2 years as well. So just in leading the team from that perspective too, and in the more traditional sense.
Yeah.
So that is the ways I kind of pulled things out, even in the weight room, like obsessed with the weight room. That was what I kind of fell in love with, and so
Hmm.
setting kind of the standards there, getting really competitive in that space, was I think a way to kind of impact and me feel fulfilled, but also kind of contribute to the team in a different way.
Yeah. And I mean, just from like being around sport, like there's so many different roles. Like I had a guy on the podcast the other day. He was my high school teammate. We had a very good team, but
Hmm.
he didn't play much. But I felt like if he was not on the team, we would not have been good. He was like the team comedian. And
Nice.
our coach was kind of like a tyrant, and it made it miserable at times. But this guy like made light of like difficult situations. And I honestly feel like that helped make us good. And even when I was coaching, like I would find the guy who was like
Hmm.
the guy who had the impression of me, I would let him go. Like, "Yeah, go ahead, do it." Like, because I think people
Yeah.
need that. I just think there's different roles that people always think like I'm in youth sports right now with my kids, and it's crazy. Like
Mm.
all the people thinking their kids are going to be the next superstar, and like people yelling and I'm just like, gee, like use sports for what they're for. Like this can teach our
Yeah.
kids to be like that role, to be a valuable member of an organization, society. And it seems like you
Yeah.
kind of found that through a struggle, obviously, through a difficult time, which is cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
uh,
Yeah, I think being able to, yeah, be ultra competitive, have like the highest work ethic, whether it be in school or sport, like that was, I think, what my identity really became for that group.
yeah,
And like you said, being at some point I stopped, my relationship with my coach shifted. And so then I was able to have that like heart to heart, like telling him like you're being ridiculous right now or whatever. And like my teammates could kind of utilize me to communicate with him and again, kind of function on like an interpersonal level. But yeah, I agree. And honestly, even working in collegiate sports and professional sports, that you should not have probably more than one or two all stars. Like
yeah, yeah,
everybody ends up having to kind of fill a role and fill a space and make it make sense. But I can only imagine the stories I've heard from my brother and him coaching youth soccer, and the parents' expectations are
yeah,
electric
yes,
to manage.
right. Well, yeah, they're probably going to keep you in business for a while.
Yeah, I don't know how much I should complain.
Yeah. But so like you got into like you went to grad school
Yeah.
afterwards. You got then ended up getting involved in, was it college athletics first? Like did you go, or did you go to the Bulls as that internship?
Yeah,
How
it
did it
was all at once. It was
Okay.
a wild year. So, Adler University was the grad school I went to. It was a social justice school. So my first internship was a social justice practicum. And then the second year, we essentially had to have an internship and an externship. So something focused on sport and then something focused just on the clinical side.
Mhm.
So I worked at a community clinic for 20 hours a week my second year, which was phenomenal. Really, really just unique work and I think
Mhm.
really shaped my understanding of mental health on like a much more systemic level. Like had I not
Yeah.
been able to work with that population who doesn't have access to healthcare, who doesn't have access to a lot of resources. So that was a big part of the clinical piece. And then on the externship sports side, yeah, I worked at a high school like once a week and I worked with the Bulls
Mhm.
for quote unquote 10 hours a week.
Yeah.
And then I worked with a loose 10 hours. If you ever been to a basketball game pre and post,
Yeah,
it was about 6 hours at that time.
for
And
sure.
then I worked with UIC's baseball team as well. And
Huh.
that got to and I stuck with the Bulls and UIC for about 3 years after that year during grad school.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think you mentioned, like, the social justice point, and I don't
Mm-hmm.
know if you know my history, but I actually started and I was a coach in the inner city of Chicago on the
Mm,
south side at, um, Kenwood Academy, and
nice.
yeah, people don't understand, like, we had a nurse 1 day a week. There was no trainer, there was no anything, there was definitely no mental health stuff, and, like, to be honest, these are the kids that need it I mean, they were I'd have a kid who I remember one time a kid came to practice the day after, like,
Mm-hmm.
his brother was shot and killed, and, like, he's there at practice the next day, and I'm thinking to myself, like, I mean, how do we not have
Mm-hmm.
something for these kids? You know, now you fast forward and I'm at like a suburban public school, which is great. We have every resource that you could ever imagine. And it's just, I'm sure, I mean, you kind of
Yeah.
saw that, like obviously working in Chicago in particular, like it's
Yeah.
unbelievable. And I don't think it's gotten like that much better, which is one of the saddest parts.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think in the big, not to take this like too far, but I think the grand scheme of thinking about mental health is we see it as such an individual issue.
Mhm.
Um, and it's not.
Yeah, right.
It can be, you know, but I think like depending on where you grew up and the system that you're in and the opportunities or lack thereof that you have, the resources, like it's not, you know, if there's a food scarcity issue, there's a mental health component to that, right? If you're losing a family member and you don't, you know, like there's so many things that go on in particular neighborhoods and communities that it is a systemic issue and it's a community problem. It's not just like an individual piece, but I think we have such a long way to go to understanding like how to really address it on a grand scale and
Yeah.
not make it an individual problem, which you know, again, a big topic to bite off in terms of like our
Yeah.
social issues and
Yeah, for sure.
what we're putting blame on.
Well, and what's funny though, not funny, but like the thing about it when I was there was one of my worst periods of depression. And
Mm,
at this point, I had not gotten any sort of help. I had not
mm,
admitted it. But I think one of the reasons that caused me not to get help and not to admit it is I'm
mm,
looking around and I'm seeing these kids going through all this stuff and I'm comparing.
sure.
I grew up in the suburbs and I had a pretty good deal. Like I didn't really have like trauma and
Mm,
I'm experiencing this and it almost made me not get help because I'm
yeah,
in that situation. So it's kind of fun, you know, it kind of works in both ways. Like it almost,
yeah,
you know, I had empathy, so much empathy for that situation that it caused me not to take care of my own self in a way, which
yeah.
is kind of
Well, and
ironic.
how much is that a message by in it well meaning, right? You weren't like trying to be malicious to yourself and like not
Yeah,
get help necessarily, but I think it's messaged all the time, even parents saying like it could be worse, or you know, people use that as a way to like ground themselves or not feel like again like your situation isn't dire. Some people are starving and people are, you know, there's all these other
yeah,
situations But I think to your point, like we internalize that in some unhealthy ways.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I have used to share and kind of educate with people for the better part of 10 years now is this concept of like the pain Olympics, and
Mhm.
that we tend to want the gold. We feel like we have to have the gold star, or we're not on the platform, and that there's this like competitiveness to pain and what people go through, and recognizing like there's no platform, there's no Olympics, there's no competition. Like unfortunately, there's plenty to go around. Like
Yes. Yeah.
everybody, like it doesn't, even with athletes, like it doesn't discriminate. Like it doesn't really care where you grew up. You might just have to go through that, or you might be dealing, or you don't have to go through that. You might be dealing with that. And so really trying to help people not feel like there isn't enough, and that if yours is worse, then that makes mine smaller. And
Yeah.
your pain is your pain. Your depression is your depression. Like that might be the worst you've ever felt. Maybe someone else has had a different experience, but there's room for all of it, unfortunately. So yeah, I definitely understand your perspective on that, though.
Yeah, I haven't, since we're on this topic, I kind of have this is like a therapy session for me, I guess
I'm
now,
all in. Let's
but
roll with it.
so like one of the things that I always tell people, and it kind of goes with what you said,
Sure.
I think comparison to other people is great when you're doing well. Like when I'm in a great spot, it's nice to
Mm.
be able to like have gratitude for
Mm.
what I have going on. But I think it is very counterproductive when you are in a terrible place to be thinking, well, it could be worse. Like I don't think that helps when you're in that like really bad spot. I do think when you're in a good spot, it's good to kind of compare and have that gratitude.
Mm.
I don't know what are your I mean, you kind of alluded to that, but you know what
Yeah.
I'm
I
saying?
mean, yeah, gratitude is the best. I love the practice of gratitude. I think there's a difference, a little nuance there of like me having gratitude for things that I have versus me having gratitude in comparison to what others have or don't have. So the
Yeah.
comparison is an added layer.
Yeah.
Um, and I agree that like ultimately it depends on how you're interpreting it, right? If I am doing really well and I start to compare myself, like I'm probably going to find someone who has their stuff together even more than I do.
Yeah, right.
And how do I like utilize that information? And to your point, I think when we're in a really bad place, let's say we're struggling with depression or a lot of anxiety, we tend to have a different lens on comparison that's usually pretty unhealthy and not helpful, and makes us feel, your interpretation of what I'm hearing is like if I'm in a really bad place and I think about someone else having it worse, that just means I don't get to feel this way, and so I
Yeah,
shouldn't
you
feel
feel
this
like you
way.
don't
Right.
deserve help. Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
I don't deserve help. I shouldn't feel this way. I'm not going to, now all of a sudden we're just fighting the reality of what's going on, as opposed to like just regardless of your judgment or your opinion or who else is experiencing what, this is just your reality. And like, how can we work with that? I
Yeah,
do think it can absolutely cloud um, the judgment that you have towards yourself, and make things a lot more difficult.
yeah. Well, okay, so I want to get back. Sorry, that was like my
Okay.
little
What
my
do we
little
got?
therapy. I want to get back to like you at UIC, like working with
Sure.
the baseball guys, because I played baseball growing up, and I feel like that is one of the most mentally, like that is a grind, and it's also just messes with. I mean, because you fail all the time. You fail more than in any other sport, and I just think it's like the hardest sport to play. Like, what exactly did you do with people? Yeah, obviously,
Mm.
you don't need to say specific names or whatever, but like, what exactly did you do there with those guys? Because I do think that is a difficult thing to do, like
Yeah.
play baseball at a high level.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, well, one, my role specifically was like a mental skills coach. And so I
Okay.
came in really honed in on like, how do we, it's answering your question either way, like, how do we deal with failure? How are we dealing with performance? But it was always rooted in performance. But I think all the same rules apply. I think one thing that really stands out to me and thinking back to the UIC days is I still have had numerous players reach out to me. And mind you, I was only like 3 or 4 years older than them, I think.
Yeah.
Um, but they've reached out to me in years since. And I think one of the maybe more subtle things that had a bigger impact was just like building a really good relationship with them. And I
Mhm.
think for young men in college, um, and just generally like where you're at developmentally, like you don't talk about things and you don't share things, even if it's just insecurities about how you're pitching or, the expectations your parents are putting on you or who's playing over you, like all these little nuances that I think men just have been conditioned to not share and not
Mhm.
take up space in that way. And so one thing I was able to do is just kind of be like a safe person for like a lot of that team. And that kind of was more obvious to me like once I left, and I would still have guys reach out. And I've had actually multiple players reach out maybe in the last couple years, 3 or 4 years, saying like, hey, I've got actually, they do have stuff going on, like some mental health concerns, and have said like, you are someone that I really trust, like who can I get help from, or who can I talk to? And I was like, if I died today, like I think I would
Mhm.
be okay, because you felt like you could open up, you could build an authentic relationship, you trusted me. And 7 years later, when you're going through it as like a real adult in the real world, you could get help, and that you can call someone. And like that was like, it's been pretty profound for me. So I think that safe space was a really big part of my role, despite kind of what my original intention was. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. No, well, so yeah, I mean, I think that's got to be so tough. Like, especially I know how it is to be a man, especially at that age. Like, you
In a
kind of think,
dugout.
yeah, and you kind of think you're invincible.
A hundred
And
percent.
yeah, and it's as a
And you think you
female.
should be. You
Yeah,
think you
yeah,
should be.
right. And then, as a female, that's got to be tough going into that environment. But I'm guessing the fact that you were an athlete helped. Like, did you share like your experiences and maybe some of your struggles as a way to build that safe space?
Yeah. Yeah, they definitely knew kind of what I would do, or like what my experience was. And I've always been really thoughtful about, and I think any clinician can speak to this, when you're integrating in a team, I have to be very aware of like, how are they hearing me say this? Like, I'm a woman, I'm blonde, I'm young. Like, I have to
Mhm.
understand how my identity is showing up in a 18 to 23-year-old dugout, with, so I was really, really careful with that. So I did a lot of banter, a lot of, talking crap, a lot of competitiveness. Like I think that helped kind of ease and build like a good rapport with them.
Yeah.
Because I can't go in there and I would never. I don't think I had one conversation where it was just like, I'm going to sit here and I'm going to stare right at you and we're going to make intimate eye contact. Like, no, we're walking the field, we're sitting in the dugout, we're doing a little bit of BP, like whatever it is. Like, we are creating like an environment where like you can just talk about the yips, or whatever it
Yeah.
was. So very, very strategic about like, how does my identity show up, how am I going to make them the most comfortable. That might be being, you know kind of rude or kind of sarcastic, or whatever, kind of using those tools. And I think that helped kind of pick on them a little bit, but then them always knowing like I had kind of their best interest in mind.
Yeah.
And to be fair, there were other, like a lot of mental skill interventions, but in the context of mental health, that is the first one that I wanted to share with you.
Well, and okay, so you bring up a very good point, and I think well, John Flood said that.
Hmm.
He said you had the ability to act like one of the guys, is what I think he said, and I believe I just think that is so important. I mean, if you came in like when I was talking to this one guy, he was like,
Hmm.
when I went to therapy the first time, this guy with like and not that you can't have this, but he's like, this guy with like this sweater vest comes in and starts like
Sure.
asking me all these questions. He's like, I couldn't relate to that.
Yeah.
And
And you lose them quick.
yeah, you lose them quick. And I imagine the fact that you can kind of navigate that ability to be one of the guys in a sense has really helped you in your career, because I think guys and just anyone in general, like you have to find a way to build the trust and relate to people before, like, I mean, I even see that as a teacher. Like I have to
Hmm.
find a way to relate to the kid, um, and I feel like maybe like joking around and a sense of humor. That's been really helpful for me. I just think that's cool. I think that's probably what you need to have to be effective at your job.
Yeah. Yeah. I think to your point about like, this just didn't exist kind of in the spaces, and it still doesn't in so many ways and areas. Um, Accessibility isn't just having someone there, right? Like it's also trying to find like the right fit for that population. And I might not have been the perfect fit. There could have absolutely been a person even better suited for that particular group. But I think having a practitioner who understands like accessibility isn't just like visibility. It is
Mhm.
trying to feel very approachable and personal and safe, and finding the balance that I still am now, navigating all the time, is if I am in the dugout and I'm standing there talking to your coach, but you just told me something that you definitely don't want him to know. And like, do we
Mhm.
have that level of trust? And obviously, like from a confidentiality standpoint, like I lose my license if I don't manage that, but that doesn't maybe make sense or mean a lot to athletes. You really have to kind of prove it. And so yeah, I think understanding like accessibility and the difference in just being visible and how to connect. And I didn't have this luxury necessarily at UIC, but in my other spaces like University of Arizona and now the Hornets, I'll always tell my athletes and my coaches, like, I do not have to be your cup of tea. Like you
Yeah.
might be really into sweater vests and I don't wear them,
Yeah.
and you're
Yeah.
going to need to find someone who it makes sense for you, or they're more straightforward, or they're less, or they're male, or they're female, or whatever. And so I'm really a huge advocate of making sure that, if I have the resources, that I can provide them to people and make it make sense.
Yeah, and I know you. So then you transitioned to Arizona. You said
Yeah.
correct,
Mhm.
and I know in our communication you said your shift kind of focused, or your your focus shift to more prevention, right, as opposed to more dealing with the aftermath. Is that when that kind of happened when you were there?
Yeah, I think Arizona, we had more resources. I was able to build out a staff. By the time I left, we had three other full-time mental health clinicians, whether they were sports psychologists or counselors. We had a part-time person who did 10 hours a week. We had interns, externs. So I think what that allowed us to do is, there's obviously a lot of triage. There's a lot of student athletes. We're taking care of 500 people. So there was
Hmm.
still tons of aftermath, quote unquote. But I
Hmm.
think because of how we went about structuring the department and even just the access I had at like an administrative level, I was able to implement policies and the visibility and this accessibility where we weren't waiting for something to happen, when players were already in services or they already were very aware of who we were and what we did. We traveled with some teams. And so that made it a lot easier to prevent, I think, a lot of different things. There was maybe trust
Hmm.
already built. So if there was an emergency that maybe did feel to some degree unpreventable, I'm now sitting down having one of the most difficult conversations that someone can have about, wanting to take their own life or some version of that. And
Hmm.
I've known them for a year, and I know them well enough to understand what they're really going to need in that moment. And are they being honest with me? Are they being honest with themselves? So I think that is kind of how I understood prevention is just changing the narrative and kind of infiltrating the entire system, even working with coaches, right? If I'm able to
Hmm.
have conversations with them, about how to manage culture, interpersonal relationships, how to support their athletes that they see 20, at least 20 hours a week, right? Even if
Yeah.
I saw you an hour a week, like I'm not catching up to that.
Yeah.
So we were able to have really good relationships with coaches too, and help kind of move the needle, with how they interfaced with their teams and how they created a level of psychological safety, that not only allowed them to be way better at their sport, but also just like generally like mentally a little bit more healthy and, ready to seek services if they needed them.
Yeah. Oh, man, I wish I was a lot younger. This would have been very helpful for me.
Yeah, like
this
I'm
would have
kind
been
of pissed
helpful for
off.
me. Yeah. Um,
Yeah.
okay, so I guess so you left Arizona and then now you're moved on to the professional ranks. And I know you talked about prevention as opposed to dealing with the aftermath. Like, I guess what I'm wondering, are you talking to everyone? Like, are you talking to every player, or is it we'll talk to you an as needed basis?
Um, yeah, definitely as needed. I mean, they're not
Okay.
mandated to like see me every day or every week. It's very much ball has to, for the most part, be in their court in the
Hmm.
same way that you could probably imagine it at UIC. It's a very similar dynamic of like you're kind of doing that dance of being accessible and being visible and providing, I'll say like I'll just kind of microdose them with different ideas or information or education and I'll still have a touch point with basically everybody because I'm with them all the time.
Hmm.
But I'm not like sitting down working with 17 people once a week like I would
Gotcha. Okay.
with maybe some, yeah, like college spaces.
Okay. And then are you
Yeah.
working with coaches and people in an administrative capacity too, as well, or are you focusing more on the players?
Yeah, players are my main priority for sure. They come first, but my role is kind of split into three chunks. So I'll players being my main point of emphasis, but this organization is phenomenal and they understand psychology exists organizationally, right? And it's an entire it's an ecosystem that we can be paying attention to in terms of how human behavior impacts everything else that we do. And so I work with the front office from like a um, talent acquisition and identification standpoint, like what kinds of people and players are we bringing into the organization? How are we making those kinds of decisions that again promote the space that we want, both from a high performance and like wellness perspective? And then I work directly with our head coach and our coaching staff, same kind of deal. It might be helping them individually, it might be helping them help their player. And now I'm just kind of
Hmm.
working through them, which I think
Hmm.
is a really good strategy unless there's a dire need for me to be the one involved. Like
Yeah.
again, they have so many strong relationships. Like we should, cash in on that capital for sure.
Hmm.
And mad respect to them for being so open to collaborating all the time. And then I also work most directly with our health and performance staff. So our ATs, PTs, strength staff. Again, a lot of working through them, working with them, doing some stuff with them individually as well. And yeah, making sure all those different spaces are kind of coming together and operating at a high level, hopefully.
Yeah. That's awesome. Well, I guess
Hmm.
over the years, do you think things have, particularly with men, do
Yeah.
you do you think things it's been easier for you than it maybe was 10 years ago? Or like, do you think things have changed?
Yes.
Yeah, it
Yes.
has. Okay, good.
Yeah. For sure. I'm sure. Again, I wasn't there 10 years. Well, the Bulls was almost 10 years ago at this point, which is crazy to say, but there's still a lot of nuance. There's still a lot of like that dance. But I
Mhm.
do think there's less resistance. A lot of the guys have come in and they've worked with somebody in college, to
Yeah.
our frustration of not maybe having somebody as accessible. Like they've had their coaches. Seen as like a good thing that a player comes into the draft or the combine and they're like, oh, yeah, I've been working with so and so for a year on XYZ. And I think it's catching up to this idea of like nutrition or strength conditioning where it's part of what you should be doing. Like your brain
Yeah.
is literally in
Yeah.
charge of everything.
Yeah.
So I think we have a long way to go, but I do think it's gotten a lot easier. And I'm sure if there was clinicians who started the NBA 10 years ago, they would be like, trust me,
Yeah.
it's easier.
Well, it seems like one of the great things too is that a couple guys have come out and started talking. Like
Yeah.
I know, like Kevin Love, DeMar DeRozan, different guys have talked about it, which I think can only help in terms of destigmatizing it
Yeah.
within recent years, which never would have happened 20 years ago. Like people probably
Yeah.
didn't even realize what was going on. And if they did, they wouldn't say anything. I think that's a pretty cool thing that the guys are actually kind of talking about it now.
Yeah. Yeah. And I hope, I think I commend them for sharing because also they become like the face of mental health, right? Which I
Mhm.
think is such a big responsibility. Whereas if someone came out and just started talking about their strength conditioning program, people would be like, good for you.
Yeah, yeah,
Great.
right.
Whereas like if they say I've like gone to therapy, it's like he's the guy, and I
Yes.
think it's just a lot of pressure. So I hope that as it keeps going, it becomes more and more part of the narrative. Like you hear it a little bit more in articles, you hear it more in, post game talks, that, people just talking more about what their kind of mental, emotional experience is with their sport. And like we said 45 minutes ago, like, it doesn't discriminate. It doesn't matter how much money you're making. It doesn't matter. There's definitely things that make it a lot harder.
Yeah.
But there's always a way to there's always a way to struggle. And
Yeah.
so I'm hoping that, yeah, it continues to be talked about in that way.
All right. Well, and then I guess the last thing that I wanted to talk about,
Okay.
with you going to have a child in not too long. How I have 4 kids. And I'm battling this, like, how do I
Mm,
approach this mental health aspect? Like, my oldest kind of knows a little bit about
mm.
my story. It was actually funny. One day we were playing basketball in the driveway, and I was playing with his friend, and I shot the ball, and it must have looked decent. And his friend was like, "Oh, Mr. Maley, did you play basketball or something?" And my son goes, "Yeah, well, he was Division 1, but then, like, I think he had, like, mental problems or something." And, like,
Oh,
I started laughing hysterically. But I think it was good because it showed that, like, he knew
yeah,
something, and he knew that there was something behind it. And I think that's
yeah.
important. I'm just trying to, like, gauge, how do I bring up the different kids as someone who's going to be
Hmm.
a mother soon. Like, how are you going to kind of approach this from a young age?
Yeah. Well, a colleague of mine got me like the ABCs of mindfulness. So I
There
think
we go.
I'll start. I was like,
Yeah,
this is the best gift. Uh, that's a big question. I don't know how much it'll change as the little man actually arrives, and
yeah.
how we'll go about it. But I'm a big believer in, um, yeah, having those open conversations all the time. I think
Mhm,
that it's a lot of what we don't say is what really kind of bites us in the ass, right? We
mhm.
avoid, and I think avoidance creates a level of resistance, and it puts the thing that we're avoiding in control. And so I think being able to talk about emotions, being able to talk about the way that the brain and the body work, like, my kids are going to get it probably
Yeah,
pretty early, and from the perspective of, like, just negative and bad emotions are just uncomfortable, right? Like, we just don't, they're not comfortable, and that's okay. Like, we're going to experience discomfort. And so, um, my husband and I are big fans of just, like, thinking about, like, our capacity to deal with things, and how are we filling ourselves up, and how are we making room for the good and the hard, and, practicing a lot of gratitude while also making room for all the things that didn't go well. Because I think that's something that again, the things that weren't said in my house made me think that I shouldn't feel that way, or I shouldn't, you know, whatever it is. And so again, their intent wasn't to, like, shut it down, but it's about giving, like, permission to talk about those things and experience those things. And um, kind of reminds me of I use this analogy a lot with some of our athletes too. Like, if you were ever afraid of, like, something under your bed, like, it wasn't the thing under the bed. It was, like, the buildup and the anticipation,
yeah,
and
yeah.
not knowing, and that's what made it so bad. And so making sure that they, like, hopefully my kiddo feels like, just because it's uncomfortable doesn't mean I've got to, like, avoid it or hide it or not make room for it, because the anticipation and the avoidance is usually what really can kind of pile things on. So we'll do our best to expose him to all the things.
That's good. That's good. He has you as a mom.
Call me in 3 years, and I'm like, it didn't work. Oh my
Yeah, yeah,
God.
dude.
Or 10 or 20. I'm like, just abort everybody. I'm so sorry for what I said.
That's awesome. Well, I guess what I wanted to tell you, the last thing, is that,
Yeah.
you know, doing this type of thing, like, I don't really go to, like, therapy anymore, I guess I would say.
Hmm.
But, like, this, just talking about this, like, doing this podcast, which is something I never would have done years ago.
Yeah.
Going and speaking in front of groups of people and, like, talking about this, it's almost been my form of therapy. Like, and
Sure.
and the phrase that I used to say screen selfishly when I was a coach, like, go set a
Mm.
screen. And one of the reasons you go set a screen is to get other people open. But what ends up happening is you get yourself open. And now I say share selfishly. So, like, the reason why I do this
Mm.
is, like, 90% of the reason I do this is to help other people. But, like, 10% is because I feel like it helps myself, just simply talking. And I think that's something that a lot of people could benefit from, is just kind of being open and vulnerable about different things. I think there is tremendous value to it. And I wanted to thank you for being a person that like is allowing people to kind of discover that, especially athletes.
Yeah. Yeah, I couldn't resonate more with that. I don't think that therapy is like the only way to navigate mental health. I think
Yeah.
we kind of overshot it there for a little bit, and we're kind of
Yeah.
working our way to like understand it differently. And I've joked with folks many times that I'm like, I don't think that my players or whoever knows that they're in therapy, because it's not how we kind of present it. And I think that it's there's a lot to be said for just having like good, deep, honest, vulnerable conversations, or feeling very safe to talk about literally anything. It doesn't have to be deep,
Yeah.
maybe it is. But I think that like permission and in space is like very, very healing.
Yeah.
I've also feel like rejuvenated and like
Yeah.
full of life right now, just because it's awesome to just talk about like the human experience and bond and resonate over it and learn
Yeah.
from it and have a different perspective every time you kind of look back on it. So yeah, I appreciate you having me on and being willing to like push me on my story, but also share some of yours too. It's awesome. It's been awesome.
Yeah. Thank you. And I really, really appreciate it. I'm going to do my normal close. I always say by sharing our stories, not only do we help others, but we end up helping ourselves, because that's the Maley way. Thank you, Rachel. I
That's
really
great.
appreciate it. Oh,
That
that
was
was great.
amazing.
Thank you so much for doing this. I know you're right in your busy time of the year, and I really
You're good.
appreciate it.
Yeah, no, it was